Welcome to Expedition Self on Times Radio with lifelong learner, entrepreneur, and creator of the worlds of Expedition Self, Sam Parado. Sam shares 4 decades of studying, guiding, and teaching how to go inside so we can build an incredibly powerful, dynamic, and validating relationship with the self. Expedition Self is laced with stellar, unexpected insights about what it means to be human. Listen now and ignite your self-development process with Sam Parado.
Well, hello. Welcome to Expedition Self. I am Sam Parado, and we are live tonight. It is a Tuesday night in our regular time slot, which is 8 p.m. And I'm glad you're here. We're going to talk about an interesting subject this evening, and it's this idea that I know who I am, or I'm trying to figure out who I am. Right? It's so knitted and embedded in perhaps every moment, right? Every action of our lives. And I have these memories of people when they get to some moment and they look at me and they go, "Listen, I know who I am." And I thought, well, that's going to be an interesting show that we can create because we make a bold statement like that. We ought to break it down and see what lives inside of it, especially in the land of Expedition Self, right? It's so fitting, right? All right. Well, so because, we're always looking for more of the self. And it dawned on me how this question is like the signage you'd find, on like pointing towards some cool site on a cross-country journey. It says, stop here to find out who you are and see how thousands of others have discovered their true selves. I don't know. I have been on the road a lot as I used to travel a lot with my grandmother, and there were always these big signs, and I think that's where my head went with that. Anyway, this is what we're going to be doing tonight. It's a great subject to call in and share about yourself as an inquiry that what you go through. And so the number is 202-570-7057. Also, before we get started, one more thing. I have been doing this for a while, and I would really appreciate it if you are liking the show, and if you listen to the show on any one of the music apps that allow you to do a like button or say, check yes, I liked it. I would really, really, really appreciate it on YouTube or Spotify, or if you listen to on Times Radio as in part of the archives, wherever it is you listen to me, it would really, really help me. And I would appreciate it if you would take a moment just to check it off and like it. And I know that for those of you who create and share content, I know what it's like to just keep sharing your work, right? And how important feedback is. So that's why I'm asking. It gives me a little bit of feedback. Oh, all right. So, big deep breath. Let's dive in. So here's the question. Who are you? And would you also say, I know who I am? Who are you? What comes to mind when those words come across the I don't know, all the waves, the radio waves, right? Who are you? Well, the first thing is you are your name. You're your name, right? It's yours. I'm Sam. That happens to be my nickname. My everyday legal name is Sandra. How many of you think of yourself as your name? I've bounced this around personally for a long, long time. Could I see myself as my name? And to be quite honest, my name didn't quite fit for a long time. I always thought I should have a 4-syllable name. So in my 20s, I decided to use Alexandra, even though that really wasn't my name, right? And then I had Sam. So I was either going to use Sam or Alexandra, but Sandra didn't fit just right. So if you had said, who are you? I would have said, well, I don't think I'm Sandra. And, I don't know how many of you know this, but to access your Akashic records, for those of you who believe in reincarnation, the vibration of your name supposedly never changes from lifetime to lifetime. And I think this is a lot of how probably numerology works too, but that the your name has this frequency that it operates on, and that frequency is unique to you. But also, think about when you know someone with a particular name and you either like them or you don't, or that name got used in a song, right? And then, you loved the song. So then when you met someone with that name, there's this kind of personality attached to it. So, suffice it to say, right? Your name is who you are. It's kind of interesting. It's just level one, level one. So, another thing for those of you who got married and changed your last name, did that change how you knew yourself? So, where has name played a role in your life? One last thing is I think about in families when one of the parents just starts listing off all the kids' names, and it's always a big joke, like John, Thomas, Ollie, Cheryl, right? Barbara, and then they're trying to find the name of the person that they're looking for, and then in a family, right, like that, right, their name matters. So this brings me to the next piece of who am I? Who am I? And I would say that the next layer of who am I is based on the roles that we fill: wife, spouse, parent, partner, child, nephew, friend. I've heard someone introduce themselves at a conference, and one of the top ways they tell the people who they are is they start by describing themselves as wife, friend, mother, sister, daughter. And I just feel like it's so interesting that we're always looking for ways to define who we are and attach ourselves, right, to a group, like people fulfilling a particular position, right, in the community, like the public at large. But what's very interesting is that we attach meaning to it, at least our own meaning. And there's probably something to be said that there's universal meanings that go along with it too, right? But what people have is their own experience to refer to. And then in that own experience, we hope that the connection of daughter, right? Daughter has some commonality about it. So that when I say I am a daughter, that anybody else who says, oh, I am a daughter, they at least understand the significance of being that, right? So that by placing the label or the title on that role, it becomes something. And I think if it becomes something, then we are hopeful that people understand like who we are through that something that it became. So let me say it again, and then you fill in the words you would use. Hi, I'm Sam, who wished she had a 4-syllable name like Alexandra, but her name is actually Sandra, and I'm a mother, daughter, and friend. So these are my words for the role. And what happens for me when I say that is, although it's a great opening of saying who I am, I don't know, for me, it doesn't feel like quite enough, right? I can sense other ways of describing who I am that want to come through my speaking. So you try it now. You try it. What would you say? You say your name in your mind, or however you could just, say it out loud, and then add these role descriptors after you say your name, right? Just fill in the role you fulfill inside of your family or inside of your human community, and see what it feels like rolling off your tongue. We're going to do some of this tonight as we go through, and at the end, I'm hoping that you'll actually feel like doing this whole exercise with the conversation. We'll see if you find it interesting enough. Okay, so this brings me to wondering, why does it matter if you know who you are? Really, why? And are you aware that it has mattered to you in your life? Is this a conversation that you've actually been in? Maybe in a really obvious way to yourself, or even in a more subtle way. So I have some thoughts I'll share, but I would love to hear from you. Why does it matter that you know who you are? Well, I think it's because we want, underneath it all, we want our experience and our days to feel as if they fulfill our desires and wants. We want a sense that we have been here, right? Maybe underneath it all, it has even something to do with our mortality, right? We want to make sure that there's some identity, right, that goes with being here. Like, and this idea that if we breathe, that we want to have some purpose for ourselves beyond simply breathing. So definers like mom and daughter and friend, well, they give us a way to rally around an idea that we create the meaning for, and there's a shared experience of it because everybody is a daughter or son, or a person, right, that is born to someone. All right, so you know how I always talk about that, have you have value simply because you breathe? It's really my favorite statement. Well, this is the thing about knowing who we are, is that it very quickly, right, turns into this kind of reverse thing that now we think we have to give value to our breath. And before we know it, we're saying, my value is in these labels, or a whole host of other things we're going to talk about tonight in response to this question of who am I? So it's like we start saying, because I'm a daughter and a friend, that this lends some important worth to my existence, or maybe even validates it. So and we don't stop there, because we'll start to add qualifiers like loyal or good or dedicated, responsive or grateful, or something like I'm a grateful daughter or a loyal friend. So this is who I am. I'm a loyal friend. I don't know. There's an emptiness about this, even though it may be true. Does it register for you to say, this is who I am? Right? I'm a loyal friend. Like, do you get those good feelings out of that? And you say, yeah, I'm a loyal friend. I will tell you what my head does with that is then I think about moments that I felt like I fell short as a friend. So I can, when I think about who I am, I would have trouble getting those kinds of words out without having my head say, oh yeah, well, what about that time when, right? So it would feel like an accurate description that I am a friend. All right, these are just a lot of things to think about, right? It's an opportunity to stop and say, what's really going on around knowing who I am and how I operate from that place of what I know. So I'm going to leave this here for a moment, and I want to explore the next way that I think we define ourselves, and that is the I'm where I come from, or my ethnic background, or my family name, right? I've often thought about what it feels like to be from a recognizable family name in some community, or I don't know, to be one of the Kennedys. I have some friends that, to be one of the monarchy in England, right? I know for me it was always from the royal family, right? I couldn't think of that word. I know for me it was always really important to tell everyone that I was part Cherokee Indian, or that I grew up in the desert for years, right? And lived on a reservation, basically. The very idea that people would think I was from the East Coast, oh my gosh, I was not having it. It just, my idea of where I came from and why that was important to this is who I am, it irked me so much. And I actually would head people off when I met them by almost introducing myself and saying, hi, I'm Sam, and and then somewhere in the next sentence, I say, yeah, I'm not really from here. I grew up in the desert. And I go off on this whole thing. And because who I was, the way I saw myself, I was from that world, right? So I want to ask you, where do you stake your claim from? Is it your family, your ethnicity, your geographical location? When you say, who am I? Or this is who I am, how does that sound? Right? Like where does that really play a role? I'm part of this group of people. So let me just say a few and see if any of these click for you. I'm a Southerner through and through. Or I come from a Hollywood family. Or my family lived in Brooklyn. My mother was Latino and my father was German. Right? So I know we're all moving towards a time of dropping labels and biases associated with much of this. But at the same time, we are answering the question, who am I? With these very potentially biased responses, even if we're not explicit about them. But when we say, who am I? They actually do form the basis for what that means to me. And I'm suggesting that we need them for our sense of self, right? We need to be able to say, this is all that there is to know about me. All right. When we come back, we're going to go on to another way to answer the question, who am I? After break.
The best of the holistic, spiritual, and conscious world. Om Times Radio. IOM FM.
Ascending Hearts is no ordinary dating site, but a spiritual dating site with a purpose, to link you with your soulmate. We engineer the serendipity so you can trust that you will attune with someone that has the same matching vibration as you. Ascending Hearts, the conscious dating site for the spiritually aware. Try Ascending Hearts for free. AscendingHearts.com.
My name is Victor Furman. Some call me the Voice. I've always been fascinated with human nature, spirituality, science, and the crossroads at which they meet. Join me Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern on Om Times Radio, and we'll explore these topics and so much more on Destination Unlimited.
If I could be you,
and you could be me, for just 1 hour,
if you could find a way
to get inside
each other's mind,
walk a mile in my shoes.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
We've all felt left out, and for some, that feeling lasts more than a moment. We can change that. Learn how at belongingbeginswithus.org, brought to you by the Ad Council.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
We are back. I'm Sam Parado, and tonight we're talking about knowing ourselves, right? Being able to say to ourselves, I know who I am, or ask the question, who am I? And so we're kind of going through a list of the different ways we could examine or ponder that question, which is, who am I? So a whole slew of added descriptors can come from our interests, like surfboarder, or lover of horses, or vegetarian, travel aficionado, organizing is my happy place, a runner, right? Things we love. It tells something about who we are, because everyone doesn't love everything, and certainly doesn't love it enough to spend energy. And we end up being drawn to what we love as a way of choosing, right? Choosing how we're going to spend our time, or where we're going to place our attention or our focus. It's interesting, because I think social media has so exploited in some ways this who am I, and I'm somebody who loves cats, and the next thing I know, I have all these thousands of pictures of cats being sent my way, and then I don't even have to go hunt them up anymore. And so there's something about that, right? When I say, who am I? But the pursuit of those things that I love, the pursuing of finding the thing that fits, that's actually part of the process, I think. So if I showed up and I said, I'm a friend, daughter, and mother who grew up in the Southwest, and my heart will always call that home. I'm from a super disjointed family, but I have a slice of American Indian in me. And my great great uncle was President McKinley. And I love to eat fancy food, make sure that color is painted on every wall in my house. And I think art and self expression is the true joy of life. And I spend every minute exploring what it means to be human. Is this me? Do I know who I am? Right? So it's interesting. Who am I? Because these are a bunch of labels that I could use to describe myself to you. But do they answer the question of knowing who I am? Well, maybe, partially, perhaps. You try it. For this moment, just jot down, like I'm hoping you have a pencil close or a pen, just jot down some of the labels and descriptors you came up with to answer that question. Who are you? How do you know yourself in the categories that I have framed up? Right? Now, again, I added some extra story to mine. Like I took some of the pieces as I was going through it. But that's really the question. If you look at your roles in your life and you look at where you live or the familial group that you're part of, right? And then you add in things that you are drawn to or love or your interests, that's quite a first statement. All right. It's interesting. Like, who am I? Because these are a bunch of labels that I could use to describe myself to you, right? They definitely are. Do you feel like you know me better? That would be one. And do I feel like they represent like how I know myself? All right, so let's go somewhere else. How about the idea that you are the total compilation of all of your thoughts and feelings? That when I say, who are you? You'd say, I'm every thought I've ever had, and I'm every feeling I've ever had too. So you see, I think when we attempt to answer the question, who am I, for ourselves, most of what we just shared is really the tip of the iceberg, right? It has to do with our sense of belonging or how we're going to fit in the community. It's kind of external. It's a way to carve a place for ourselves that we can say, this is me, this is mine. And I've touched on this in other shows because we talk a lot about identity and belonging, but it is a place to start for sure, because a child knowing they are part of the Schaefer family, it provides them with place and significance, and this matters to human beings, this sense of roots. But the question of who I am, or who am I as a sort of search for the self, is very different. And along the way of the search, we might identify ourselves with the things we love, or our roles, or our religious community, or our ethnicity. But the real search of who we are, it actually begins to push those things to the background so that we can settle more deeply into answers that reflect more life back to us, that help us expand into our lifetime rather than box ourselves in. Now, I hope you kind of got that little twist that I just did, because what I'm saying is that on one hand, I can say, this is who I am, and I have these concrete things that are true. But really, when I start questioning who am I, it could take me someplace that's much more evolutionary for myself. So I want to stop for a moment and talk about this idea. How do you expand into a lifetime rather than box ourselves in? In my experience with growth work, the act of boxing ourselves in is almost always a significant and super important stop along the way to expansion. The not great part is that sometimes people get stuck there. Maybe I could say everybody gets stuck there at one moment or another. And it's really what's underneath the entire point of this show, that when someone says, I know who I am, that it is as limiting as it can be expansive. And it's as rigid as it can be the opening for an alternative choice. Right? I know who I am can be used to close the door or open one. Okay, so right, I know who I am can be a box. Well, this is who I am, that's how it's going to be. Or it can be a place where it gives me the security to say, oh, this is who I am. I rest there for a while. And before I know it, I'm like, you know what? I think I'm more than that. I think I have something different to add, or this is going to change for me. You know, much of what I talk about is how to become more conscious, to really look underneath your motives and your words and your way of being and understand it for what it really is, and not just accept things at face value. And in this case, the pursuit you engage in to answer the question, who am I? And then the resulting answers you discover, well, they're very much necessary to your journey as you transform and grow. But if you just stop when you get the answer that provides the comfort of knowing and identity and belonging, well, then you also stop your own evolution and consciousness building. I'm hoping that this is making some sense. This is the time that if you're listening to this and I'm live, you ought to call, because then you could say, yeah, that made sense, or no, it didn't. But it's kind of like we cling to the security of knowing who we are, and we land on the first thing we can land on or the second thing we can land on. But if we hold on for too long, we then actually lose the opportunity to jump off to the next ledge, right? So it's kind of one of those very interesting concepts, right? Human being concepts, because you have to approach it from both sides. So who am I is all of your thoughts and feelings. So what does that mean? The thing about this one is that who you are is the entirety of your thoughts and feelings, and it's what you make of them, how you would articulate them, how they have changed, what caused that change, how much you do it. So it's not just, oh, I had a thought and I stuck with it. So in my case, I'd say I'm someone who likes to think about things in depth. But the biggest challenge I had was finding a way to be in relationship with my feelings and feel good about myself when I was feeling, to feel like I could handle them when they were triggered by interactions. So that's I just described who I am around my thoughts and feelings. You might ask yourself about thoughts and feelings, like the major theme of them, and also the parts that you'd rather not attach yourself to. How do you relate to emotions? And which ones do you have trouble allowing yourself to feel? This might sound like, I have always felt threatened by other people who are more successful or talented than me. Right? Thoughts and feelings. It's like you think about what you think about. You think about how you feel. You bring a level of intention to that because you want to say, if I am the compilation of all my thoughts and feelings, well, then if I'm going to tell people who I am, I've got to tell them who I am in the context of those thoughts and feelings. So yes, I'm saying this is who you are, your feelings and the events. Like I lived through a major earthquake and the street split down the middle. Or I moved across country when I was 22 years old And it was a really, really major cultural shift for me. These are events, and they say something about who I am. And mostly, most important, they matter to me. So if I'm asked who I am, I can pull from any of these places in my life to describe myself. But there's something else that goes on, right? When I think about who am I and I put into it all my thoughts and feelings, I start giving myself attention. I start sending validation my way. I start actually for myself appreciating that I exist, that I am here for myself, that I own my life and my being experience. And so, this big question of I know who I am, or the question of who am I, is one that actually begins to give yourself the kind of care and attention and like I see you, like a sense of being seen that I think most of us really don't get. And yet, I think as human beings, we need it. So, this is why it's important that people move forwards and backwards in their own personal timelines without shying away from what's there, without trying to either brush it under the rug or compartmentalize it or make it seem positive when it really didn't feel all that positive, right? If you are going to really know who you are, you need access to all those thoughts and all those feelings, basically to all of you. All right, we'll take a breath. So the challenge with exploring this idea of I know who I am is that the minute you latch onto one idea or land in some conclusion about it, you're probably not going to give it up very easily. And you're likely not going to challenge it either. So remember earlier I was talking about how you are trying to find something to latch onto, but the minute you do, you also want to try to get bigger than it or release it. That's how we work with this idea of who am I? Who am I? I know this about me. What else can I find about who I am? So I am someone who doesn't like heights. Okay, that's who I am. Yes, it's tied to a fear, but I can make a whole case about why I like my feet on the ground, how I'm happier going barefoot, how I have a Taurus rising, and that's an earth sign, and how I feel more at home in the dirt. Like, truly, I am someone who, like, if you want to know me, I don't like heights. But now, what does that mean for the rest of my life? Is it central to who I am? If I challenge it, does it mean that I'm going to lose my sense of identity as a person, that I'm going to feel like I'm not who I thought I was? Now, this one is kind of easy because most would say that it's not great that I don't like heights, and that it limits my freedom in moving around the world. So why wouldn't I want to challenge it? And of course, it's not who I am. See, when we think about the places where we get attached and then we have to let go, we have it going in the reverse as well, where there are things that we discover about ourselves. Oh my gosh, I actually got jealous there, right? Those not nice things about being a human being, the places where I close doors or my heart shuts down. It's like, oh my gosh, that's not who I am. But actually, that's as much of who I am as me not liking heights. So, like, what if I said I'm someone who can't do relationships unless the person's very trustworthy? Well, that one's a bit more difficult because we'd all say, well, right, absolutely, don't be in a relationship unless they're trustworthy. But this is the point. The minute I decide something about myself that I used to say, this is who I am, stamp on the, pound on the table, right? I run the very real risk that I'm going to dictate the rest of my life from that place. Now, I've heard a lot of older people say, I finally got to the place where I just didn't have to put myself in situations that made me uncomfortable anymore. I finally got to a place where I knew what I liked and I knew what I didn't, and I just didn't have to stretch outside of that. Well, I just have to say, I grew up working in retirement communities, and I'm now in an age group that's older. And there is such a risk, there's two sides of that coin, right? Because on the one hand, it's a great thing to be able to know how to take care of yourself and how to put yourself in situations that really work, right? Peace follows that. But on the other side of that coin, the world gets smaller for us. It gets smaller. All right. So when we come back from break, which we're going to go into break in just a second, we're going to circle back to some of the other ways that you can think about who you are and how you can know yourself better.
The best of holistic, spiritual, and conscious world. Om Times Radio. IOM FM. Host your show on IOM FM, the radio network of Om Times Media, one of the more recognized brand names in the conscious community, and is backed by the extensive marketing reach of Om Times. Hosting a show on IOM FM immediately connects you with our extensive, dedicated community.
Hello, I'm Sandy Sedgbeer, host of Om Times Magazine's flagship radio show, What is Going On. My passion is sifting through information, research, and innovations from new thought teachers, speakers, and researchers pushing back the boundaries of what we know about life, energy, metaphysics, and the universe. I love shifting perceptions about who we are, why we're here, and how quickly impossible becomes normal when we open our minds, expand our awareness, and accept that the only limits that exist are those we place upon ourselves. So if you're the kind of forward-thinking, eager investigator of what lies beyond the current reality that most perceive, why not make a date to come play with me in the field of possibilities at 4 p.m. Pacific Time, 7 p.m. Eastern Time every Thursday, and together we can discover what's really going on.
You came across someone struggling with hunger. How would you recognize them? Would you notice an 8-year-old girl who's not excited for summer break
because she may not be having lunch again until September?
Or a war veteran who's having a hard time landing a job
and getting back on his feet?
I am the 1 in 8 Americans who struggle with hunger. I am hunger in America.
Hunger can be hard to recognize. Learn why at IamHungerInAmerica.org. Brought to you by Feeding America and the Ad Council.
All right, we are back. I'm Sam Parado, and you're listening to Expedition Self. And tonight we're just talking about this idea of I know myself. I know who I am. And we're also playing with the idea of how do we explore who am I? And so when we went on break, I said we're going to keep going down the list of the different ways that you can describe who you are. And so one of them is what you need to feel comfort and safe, and how important that is to you. Now, I'm using my own experience a lot tonight because I feel like it helps to make it stick for you. So I need comfort. I need to feel comfort. I need pillows that are soft, a bed that's not too hard. I can't stand being doused in cold rain. I don't like it when my feet are cold and wet. So how would you answer that question? What is your requirement for feeling comfort? And how does that shape the way you spend your time? And what impact does it have on the way you interact or live with others, or how demanding you are? So you could say, I'm very demanding when my creature comforts are not taken care of. I'm very demanding, but I take the responsibility to get myself comfortable, would be another way to say this is who I am. Or I could be someone who says, actually, I think everybody around me should care about what's going on with my creature comforts when they're not good, right? So the idea of spending time thinking about how does this go? Most of what we become attuned to inside of ourselves is going to dictate what we care about for others. Like, this is what we're going to tolerate. So I used to push myself really, really hard, work too long, and get super exhausted. And this meant that I was going to do that with others. So at that time, if I were to describe who I was, this is kind of a form of comfort, right? Lack of it. I would have said I was a bear to work with. I was insensitive, overly demanding, and mean. So hear me say it again. I know who I am. At the time, I didn't know who I was being. But the real question here is, did I know who I was? And were those things really who I was? Now, I just put a twist in here. So, did I know who I was at that time? No. I was being this bear to work with, right? But the answer to that is no, I didn't know. And in truth, I didn't even really know who I was being either. I really didn't understand that I was being a bear. I didn't know how to stop being a bear. I didn't register what it was all about. So this is the point I want to make. I think we can confuse knowing who we are as a person with who we are being as that person. And this lessens the possibility of transforming ourselves. And you can hear some of this in the examples I've given. I used to be someone who was possessive about everything. Now I'm less so. Is this a statement about who I am or who I was being? I'll let you ponder that. Right? Another great question you could ask yourself when thinking about who you are might be, what lights you up and makes you come alive? And if you're tired, right, you wake up for it. Now, I just did a bit of a quick twist there. What I want you to start recognizing is that everything that we say is who we are. Much of it is more about who we're being or who we are becoming, right? It's almost like it's a stepping stone along the way of our journey. And we have to define the edges of that stepping stone and say, this is who I am. But again, we want to move to the next stepping stone. So, all right. So here we are. We're in this next way to describe who I am, right? Who I am right now. Who is it really central to who I am? So where's your joy? This is so important to get in touch with. Like over life, you start to separate the difference between what gives you joy and what makes you feel successful, right? Like you've won. This track will often illuminate feelings that you want to feel. You know, like for me, everything is about getting more freedom, more agency, more of a sense that I can tap into the possibilities of my life. But somebody else might love extreme sports. They like being on that edge. They like to push themselves and get scared and master it, right? They prove how strong they are. It makes them feel very alive. It's a core thing. So if you ask them who they are, they might say, I am someone who has to feel like I'm pushing limits and stimulating the places that make me feel like I've conquered something and I'm alive. You might find another person, maybe this is you, who wants to be helpful to the world. It gives you so much joy to volunteer time to a worthy cause. And when you work with it, you see that what it really is that you're someone who wants to feel needed. And you give your time freely and generously because of that. It's worth noting that people have belief systems that interfere with being who they are. They might believe that they're not really supposed to be happy, or that hard work has to override the fun, or that satisfaction can only come and peace when you're retired. This is one of those things as we go through life when people will say, well, all your limitations are just in your mind. I think there are belief systems that we hold that prevent us from actually getting to something that we would say, yes, this is who I am. It's so important to look at your beliefs when thinking about who you are because they shape what is and isn't an acceptable outcome or a conclusion. All right, another one. I'm kind of running through this list, right, of how do you think about who you are? So your pain, your suffering, and how this has affected the way you see life. and live in it is a huge part of who you are. We all know that most people just don't comfortably share their pain and suffering. So what this means is that when they tell you who they are, well, they're doing it in code form on top of all the moments when they had pain and suffering. So the more you can spend time thinking about it, like, this is what happened, this is what I felt, this is what I concluded from it, and this is how I now operate because of it, well, the more you're going to be free to not come from that pain and suffering, right? Because it's not buried underneath there, and it gets to come into the light of day, and it gets to be seen and validated. And next thing you know, you don't have to stand on that stepping stone so much. So it might then sound more like, well, I'm a survivor of incredible amounts of trauma. This is who I am. And I'm always working with it so my life isn't traumatic in the way it used to be. Or it could sound like I'm someone who's dedicated to healing this trauma for as long as it takes. All right, we're going to go to the next one. So the next one is work. All right. I recently got in a conversation with someone about how they think about their work. And somewhere it became clear that she believed that who she was the work she did. Like, who are you? Well, I'm my work. So I'm wondering, how do you see this? Do you think that's true? So I kind of think my work has something to do with who I am. But to me, who I am is more about how I express myself through my work. What's your take on this? Right? Your work, in this case, would fit that idea of how you impact that world or that external focus. But the qualities you bring to your work, the way you spend your time to earn a living, why you chose it, or how you relate to it, would say a lot about who you are. So I think we like to describe who we are through the label for our profession or chosen way of working. I'm a doctor, or I'm an artist, or I'm a homemaker, or I'm a banker, or teacher, right? I think this does say something about who we are. But like I've been reiterating through the entire conversation, needing to find a place to plant ourselves when we answer the question, who am I, is where we start. And then planting ourselves so deeply that we have no flexibility in how we see ourselves or what we're open to in our lives is super relevant with this particular aspect of, who am I, right? The other thing that plays a big role is this idea of surviving and making a living. Like, I hear the opposite sometimes, like, my work is not who I am. I just work to make a living. What do you do with that? So what does that say about who someone is? That they're willing to work just to make money, but it isn't an expression of their core central selves? I don't know. There must be something there, whether it's a belief system or something about who they are, because really, are human beings designed to work at half-mast in their lives, right? So I think as a person moves up like Maslow's hierarchy, there's more to see about who they are because they have the range of motion to experiment with it, to not just be living inside of whatever that survival mode is. All right, this next one is a favorite, right? I started growth work a long time ago and was convinced that we have these life themes we're working with. Like every moment, every interaction, every circumstance, someone brought more, you got more insight about this theme. And I was convinced that it started at a young age. So this is where I think, whether you're working with this idea of personal power or not, your sense of power, your choice making, and how you connect to powerlessness or helplessness is one of the ways you can describe who you are, right? I don't really like power as an example, or I was fascinated by people, like what they did with their power. But for a long time, I didn't see clearly my own powerless places. But what I did know was that I wanted to have the power to do what I wanted to do. I mean, to the point really of being defiant about all kinds of things, So you couldn't tell me what to do when I was young. I was impenetrable. but that's who I was. That's who I was being. But because I am also someone who is a student at heart, that is who I am. I am a student. I love learning through life, right? It became clear that I was impenetrable and I wasn't powerful at all. So do you see how there's a difference between who you are being and a recognition of some aspect of yourself and then landing on this is who I am? And this difference, it really defines a kind of dynamic tension that can spur you to really grow. You can ask yourself, is this who I am? If I peeled away all the excess and the distraction and the supposed tos and the shoulds, would I be left with this? And I cannot tell you how many times in my life I have asked myself, if I didn't have to do this right now, would I still do it? If I had no needs for survival, who would I be and how would I spend my time? And one of the answers that I would come up with is that I'm someone who likes work. I like to work. I like to have a purpose. It helps me to have some accountability to something in the outside world. And this is that process that we engage in. So I think we have time for one more area, which is the who am I is the creative way you express your you-ness, right? You know, you've heard me countless times talk about how I discovered my inner writer and artist at the ripe old age of 50. Well, what's funny about that is I would say that loving art and being drawn by the way art is a more descriptive experience was always present. That way of thinking has always been at the core of who I am, but there were so many layers on top of it. So this growth work journey at any time began with thinking I was something and then discovering that I wasn't that thing, right? So around, like that's the value is to use I know who I am actually as a dynamic aspect of a process, knowing that you need to pin it down and then release it, right? That you just need to pin it down and release it. So you can identify with yourself creatively. I do stained glass. I can't sing on key. I don't like opera. I'm a wicked problem solver who finds solutions to really, really difficult puzzles, right? These are answers to who am I? So by now in the conversation, you can see where a write-up about who you are would be super fascinating using these categories I've shared as a way to approach it. Like you could think about doing it as an exercise out of tonight's show is write it up, title the page, who am I? And then use the categories and let it rip, right? Make a list, write it out, add sentences, let the answers just literally flow through your mind, and then let it open up to anything else that comes through. I think you'll be surprised by the way your answers crystallize a sense of yourself. It gives you a chance to stop and say, I am this, right? You might say, I'm an artist, and then you'll notice the next thing you write is, but that didn't start for a long, long time. Or I was once a daughter and a mother, but that's changed over the years. And now I see myself as this fierce woman creating relationships wherever she goes. Or I once worked nonstop at being good at my work, working as a general contractor, but now I realize that while I'll always love to build, gardening and caring for my home and my grandchildren is really what I'm all about. And no, that's not me. I'm not a general contractor. That the tending and building was always there. But now I direct it in an entirely new way. Well, I hope this evening that you have enjoyed the journey as we've walked through who am I and how we can utilize that in a more dynamic way to actually find who we are and be able to give ourselves more support and more attention and more care as we look. I also just want to say that for myself, I am finding it to be such a challenge in the world right now with everything that's going on, and then to keep my focus on how am I growing and how am I bringing myself to each moment. And so I'm sending lots of love and appreciation and support and care to all the people in the world that are struggling with how the world is going. And on that note, I wish you all a wonderful week. Thank you for being with me.